The erosion of your purchasing power is one of the key risks of any financial plan. So this week, we're going to take a look at the Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment for 2024 and understand a little bit more about how that cost of living adjustment is calculated.
So how did we get here to where the Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment is a hot topic? Well, in 2020, when we had the pandemic and lockdown and government printing a lot of money, that led to inflation. And so what we used to have as a maybe 2 or 3% cost of living adjustment for Social Security and more of a gentle rise in the costs of goods and services, now we've seen a lot more of that over the last couple of years. And so we get a lot more questions on how did we get here to actually how a cost of living adjustment is calculated, how even inflation is calculated. And so we're going to dive into that today. And thank goodness we've got Austin ready to put his nerd hat on to get into the details. But we won't bury the lead here. 2024, the Social Security Administration announced that we will have a 3.2% increase in Social Security benefits, that income stream for retirees. And so it'll be a modest bump, not as big as last year, not as small as many of the years prior. But it will be something there. So how did we get there, though, Austin, getting to that 3.2% or a calculation overall? What's the thought process?
Yeah, so the Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment I find is a fascinating way to dive into some of the details of the economy. Now, what we need to understand is we'll take a look at some of the history of Social Security, but how it's calculated is they look at quarter three. So we're thinking July, August, September. So they take it 1 year prior and say, what was the average of the consumer price index for urban and clerical workers? Again, we'll figure out what's different between that and other CPI indexes in a little bit, but that's the CPI-W. That's the one that Social Security uses. So again, they look quarter three a year ago and say, what was the average of those 3 months? And they look at quarter three of this year and say, what are the average of these 3 months? So July, August, September, average them together. How much did it grow? That's your Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment. It's interesting to note that in their press release, the Social Security Administration said for September of 2023 alone, over half of the increase came just from housing costs. And so if you own your own home, then you may get an additional bump because you don't have housing costs that are as substantial as someone that's maybe renting. And so you may see some increase of purchasing power. But again, as we'll see it as well, this urban and clerical workers, it's only representative of about 30% of the population, and less so of retirees that are actually getting the benefit of the cost of living adjustment. So we'll dive into some of the beautiful history of the Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment. So in 1972, this was when the US Congress decided that they were going to enact the cost of living provision into the Social Security amendments. And the automatic COLAs began in 1975. So every year thereafter, again, we've looked at the CPI-W, what did it do last year, how much did it grow this year, and that's how they get the cost of living adjustment every year thereafter. Before then, it took a special legislation of Congress to allow for a cost of living adjustment, which, as we've seen recently, Congress isn't willing to move a whole lot on anything on Social Security. And so if we were anticipating a Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment and Congress had to move, you may never get one.
Right.
But thankfully, it is now written into the code. So every year there's going to be that adjustment. So what, you might ask, is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers? Well, it's broken into 3 macro categories. They're food and beverages, energy, and then all items less food and energy. So those items include housing, transportation, consumer goods, medical service, apparel. The list goes on and on and on. And really, if you want to dive deep into this, you can get onto the Bureau of Labor Statistics website and you can download this table and see what each one of those items, and it breaks it down into what did something like apples, what did they increase? What did the cost of consumer goods, what did those increase? What did the cost of gasoline? What's ethanol? It gets very granular.
Well, I remember a couple of years ago when we did an inflation presentation, we found that one of the few categories that actually decreased in the midst of 2021, I think, was sewing machines.
Sewing machines did decrease.
We can always find that silver lining.
Yeah. So The CPI-W, what's interesting about it, and this comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you have to meet 2 requirements for a household to be included in the CPI-W. So this is a subset of the Universal Consumer Price Index. And those 2 requirements are more than 1/2 of the household income must come from clerical or wage occupations. And at least one of the household earners must have been employed for at least 37 weeks during the previous 12 months. And then they say the CPI-W represents about 30% of the total US population. And when you really think about it, retirees that are earning Social Security, not all of them are wage earners, and not all of them are going to be employed for 37 weeks during the year.
Very few, percentage-wise, would fit either of those pieces.
Yeah. And really, this one, it places a greater emphasis on gas, transportation, rent, and food than other indices. And I would say our retirees that we know well, yeah, they may be traveling, but their rent isn't going up and down because most of them own their own home. They may drive, but they don't drive on every day to work and back. And maybe they're not driving to a job site that is far away. So it really is an interesting reason why they chose this. But part of it is they chose it in 1972 and they haven't changed it ever since. Mm-hmm. And those are some of the challenges that face. Is this the index that we should be inflating Social Security to? Mm-hmm. And one of the rationales is said, okay, there is a consumer price index for the elderly, the CPI-E, and there is weighting that is more on housing and medical care, transportation, vehicle purchase, and recreation. So it tilted a little bit more to what the folks that are retired and receiving Social Security income would receive. The caveat here, though, is that would run the trust fund out a little bit faster because you're giving a cost of living increase based on what they spend on. And if that is higher, then it's going to run that trust fund out sooner.
Well, and the healthcare costs usually are higher for folks who are retirees than for, say, folks in their 20s.
Absolutely.
The optics seem like they're a problem here too. The CPI-E, do we have to say elderly? Couldn't we say like retirees or something like that? Could we not come up with something that's a little more neutral or positive?
You would think so, but a lot of these indexes have been around for a long time.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll put a word into my friends, the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Good.
So really, the design of Social Security cost of living adjustment is for those that are receiving Social Security benefits, around 71 million Americans, to keep pace with inflation so their purchasing power isn't eroded as fast. Again, there are some people that this affects more than others, but by and large, that's the design of it. So we've gone over how it's calculated, but we'll run through some numbers here. So in 2022, the CPI, the quarter 3 average was 291.901. So July it was 292.219. August it went down to 291.629. September it was 291.854. So you blend those together, 291.909. In 2023, the quarter 3 average was 301.238. So July was 299.899. August was 301.551. And September was 302.257. So if you do that year over year, you take 2023 minus 2022, divide that by 2022, you get a 3.2% year over year change. So that's how they do it. And it's fairly straightforward. It's not like the income-related Medicare adjustment amount that is a very much more calculated, just a much different way that it's calculated and a little bit harder to quantify. This one's fairly simple. So if Congress decided to keep the calculation but change the index to CPI-E that we were talking about, that same year over year would actually have been a bit closer to 4%. So that's how we can see that if you changed it to CPI-E, then it's going to run that trust fund down faster because you've got essentially 80 basis points that it's an increase. So you're going from 3.2 to 4. And if you're already struggling to fund Social Security, you don't necessarily want to run it out faster. So there's an interesting website that you can go to that is from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And you can play with some of these numbers to see what would run that Social Security trust fund out quicker or slower. And so we'll put a link to that in the description below if you want to take a look at that and see what is really happening with the trust fund and how can you maybe make it last a little bit longer.
So natural question then would be, what else is affected by this cost of living adjustment calculation? How does that play out?
Yeah. So you think about the different areas that Social Security effects. You've got your income wage base. So for those of us that are still working, there is a Social Security, essentially a tax that comes out of each one of our paychecks that goes to Social Security. So for 2023, that base is going to be increased to $168,800 or $168,800. And so what that means is all of our income up to $168,800 is going to be taxed for Social Security purposes. So that's what goes to funding that trust fund. Again, we've done a longer, deeper dive on ways that maybe the trust fund can be depleted less slowly. One of those is saying, what if we took away that wage base? Instead of increasing it every year for inflation, what if we just said, do away with that? Again, that's not the premise of this video, but that's one of the things that's affected. Another thing is the earnings limit. So this really affects retirees or people that are closer to retirement a little bit more. So if you begin your Social Security before you have fully retired, there is a calculation that you can receive a reduced amount of benefits during those years that you're still working, but you have not achieved your full retirement age. So let's say we have a client who decides to take Social Security at 62. Their full retirement age is 67. So the earnings limit for before full retirement age is $22,230. So for every $2 earned over $22,320, then your benefit that you receive from Social Security is going to be reduced by $1. Similarly, in the year that you turn your full retirement age, so in this example, 67, that is $59,520. So you get a little bit of a bump in that year that you turn 67, but for every $3 that you earn over $59,320, your Social Security benefit is going to be reduced by $1. And that's only if you're taking it before your full retirement age. Let's say you hit 67, you want to keep working, then that limit no longer matters because you've hit your full retirement age. This is just before. They're going to reduce that benefit. And so really, we would say take a strong consideration if you're still working, if you need to take Social Security because your benefit is going to be reduced.
Well, and that typically will just happen if we have someone, say, who takes at 62, they're anticipating retiring, and then lo and behold, they get a consulting gig that's $50,000. And so now we've got to negotiate. And oftentimes what you can do actually is just suspend your Social Security benefit until that consulting gig, for instance, runs its course. And then if you want to refile and start Social Security again, you can do so. And you will get credit, for that, not receiving those benefits over that period of time.
So some frequently asked questions that we get. How will the Social Security cost of living adjustment impact my monthly benefit? So we'll look at a couple scenarios here. We'll start off with Carl. He's got $3,500 per month from his Social Security benefit in 2023. So the first month that you'll receive the cost of living adjustment is going to be January of 2024. So for Carl, that 3.2% increase bumps him from $3,500 to about $3,600, $3,612 in his monthly benefit starting again January of 2024. And this is for both couples or both spouses of a couple. So let's say Mike and Mary each receive Social Security benefits. If Mike receives $3,000, his benefit is going to be adjusted up to about $3,096. And if Mary receives about $1,500 of total benefit, hers is going to go to about $1,548. So there is a adjustment for both Mike and Mary in this situation. So the cost of living adjustment isn't just for one spouse, nor is it just for the primary spouse if they are getting a spousal benefit. So it's for both parties therein. Spencer, you want to touch on any changes to the Medicare premiums and the cost of living adjustment increase?
Well, and so people oftentimes will get this confused, but it's not the same adjustment in terms of the expense for your Medicare premiums as the increase is for your Social Security benefits. It's different every year. So Social Security benefits are driven by what you talked about, the CPI numbers and increase there, which is 3.2% this year. Medicare, though, for Part B and Part D, and then the surcharges as well, is driven by the actual cost of administering the Medicare program. And so that's going up by about 6% this year. So instead of having an overall set of premiums that might be somewhere in the neighborhood of $165 for Part B on a month-to-month basis, now we're going up to about $175. That increase there. So, and it's a little bit different for each of the brackets there as well for Medicare surcharges. We'll have a link there that you can look at those, but the Medicare surcharge brackets are moving up along with the premiums or the taxes. The surcharges themselves are also moving up by about 6%, overall. So each one of those areas is stepping up, meaning that if you do get into the surcharges, then it's going to be more punitive against you because Medicare is costing more to administer. But you also have a little bit more space in those brackets. And we've got a whole nother video on how the income-related Medicare adjustment amount calculations are. And you've already referenced that is a different set of calculations that runs over a 3-year time frame rather than just a 1-year time frame.
So one of the other questions we get are, what are some of the tax implications of Social Security payments? If they increase, am I going to get dinged a little bit harder? The reality is it depends. And we are not tax professionals, so take this all with a grain of salt. Take it to your tax professional, ask them questions about it. But with everything tax related, it depends. But one of the things that we can say is in 1983, provisional income limits were established. And they were set at the 50% threshold that year. And then 10 years later in 1993, the 85% threshold was established. If you want a deeper dive on those provisional income calculations, we've done deeper dives on how Social Security income is taxed, but it's a long, arduous calculation there.
And if you think this is nerdy, oh my goodness, provisional income, and you like it, provisional income is for you.
It's a beautiful thing. So those thresholds were, again, set up 30 years ago. And the single tax filers, the brackets are once you hit $25,000 of provisional income to $34,000, it's a progressive sliding scale. So it's not once you hit $25,000, then you're taxed at 50%, or 50% is included in your taxable income. It's a sliding scale. So once you get a little bit closer to that $34,000 of provisional income, that's when you're getting closer to that 50%. And then once you hit $34,000, that's when you step into that 85% bracket. So again, this is a sliding scale. So that's where we have to be really cautious on how we look at this and say, well, you jumped into $25,000, so now you're getting taxed at X, Y, or Z.
The big picture, though, is we haven't reset those major thresholds. And so by and large, year by year, more income that's coming from Social Security is being taxed, is being included as ordinary income. If we saw those thresholds reset, which is unlikely, they haven't been touched in 30 years now, then we could see taxes lower. And you could make the point, as some have, that you pay taxes on the funds that you pay into FICA, and then when you get paid from Social Security, you pay those taxes again. So there is a level of double taxation going on here for most of our clients.
So again, like we say, we're not tax professionals. Take your Social Security income, take your taxes to your tax professional to figure out what's going to change for you. So the one piece that we would say is if you're layering on the increase plus you have required minimum distributions this year, maybe you have another distribution that's coming, that's when it can really be more punitive. If you're going from a place where you've only lived on Social Security and then you have to go from there to now taking Social Security plus RMDs, that's when you're going to see more of your income most likely included.
Well, thanks again for joining us for this video. Austin, thanks for walking us through how we got to the point where we have those benefit increases calculated. Again, it's going to be 3.2% going into 2024 for Social Security benefits as the cost of living adjustment. With that, we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
If you like these financial planning videos, please share it with a friend. And if you have questions, go to our website at SiriusRetirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at SiriusRetirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.